My son-in-law called me the basement grandpa at Thanksgiving. He said it while everyone sat around a $1.2 million house he kept calling his. When dinner was served, he looked at me and smiled. Basement's good enough for him. Then he handed me a paper plate with cold turkey wrapped in foil. My daughter looked down at her napkin. She said nothing. That silence hurt worse than the stares. I carried my plate down to the basement and sat on a folding chair beside the washing machine, while the whole family ate upstairs. Then my son-in-law laughed and said, "Main table is for real family." My little grandson came down with pumpkin pie and asked, "Grandpa, why aren't you real family tonight?" I touched the brass key in my pocket. "Welcome to Final Act Revenge. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Please take care of your health while you listen." Because 3 days later, my lawyer sat at that same dining table and asked who really owned his new house. My name is Jack Badman. I am 72 years old, and for most of my working life, I was a municipal building inspector in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. That means I spent 38 years walking through other people's houses with a flashlight in one hand and a clipboard in the other. I checked cracked foundations, loose handrails, bad wiring, basement moisture, roof lines that sagged just enough to tell a quiet story. People think houses hide their problems. They do not. Houses speak all the time. You just have to know where to look. The harder thing, I learned too late, is inspecting a family. Because families can smile at dinner while the whole structure underneath is already shifting. My wife, Carol, understood that better than I did. Carol Badman taught home economics before schools decided young people no longer needed to learn how to cook soup, balance a checkbook, sew a button, or read the fine print before signing a loan. She believed those things mattered. She used to say, "A home is not just where people sleep, Jack. It's where they learn whether they are safe." Carol was gentle, but not soft. There is a difference. She could bake a pie for a neighbor in the morning and still tell a grown man by noon that he was using debt like a shovel to dig under his own porch. She had a binder called Home Skills Night. Inside were lessons she taught at the community center. Read before you sign. What home equity really costs. When family pressure becomes financial risk. Basic repairs that save expensive trouble. That was Carol. She did not just want people to have houses. She wanted them to understand the doors they were walking through. When our daughter Rachel married Grant Pryor, Carol tried hard to be fair. Grant was polished, loud, confident. He sold roofing and solar packages, and he had the kind of handshake that arrived half a second before the truth did. Rachel loved him, so we tried to love him too. But Carol noticed things. She noticed how Grant said, "my future," more often than "our family." She noticed how he talked about equity before he talked about safety. She noticed how he looked at houses like ladders, not homes. One night, after Grant had finished explaining how smart people make their house work for them, Carol stood at the sink washing 2 coffee cups and said, "Jack, that man doesn't want a roof. He wants a machine that prints status." I told her maybe she was being hard on him. She looked at me over her glasses. "You inspect a porch like it owes you money, but you get sentimental with people holding hammers." She was right. She usually was. When Carol got sick in 2022, she started thinking about Rachel and the children more than herself. Abby was still young then, already sharp-eyed and quiet. Theo was little enough to fall asleep holding a toy truck. Carol worried about them. Not because Rachel was a bad mother. Rachel worked hard as a school attendance coordinator. She knew which kids were skipping because they were lazy and which ones were missing school because home had become too heavy. But Rachel had always been afraid of conflict. That fear made her gentle with children and weak with Grant. So Carol and I made a decision. We sold our small cottage outside town. It was not fancy, but it held 30 years of Sunday coffee, Christmas boxes, and the creaky porch Carol said I inspected too often. The sale money, a little life insurance, and savings we had tucked away went into the Badman Family Housing Trust. Helen Ward handled the paperwork. The trust bought the new house for Rachel and the children to live in safely. A good house, 4 bedrooms, a wide kitchen, a solid basement, enough yard for Theo to run and Abby to pretend she was too old to enjoy family cookouts. But the deed did not carry Grant's name. That was Carol's condition. Rachel was a protected resident beneficiary. Abby and Theo were future beneficiaries. Grant had conditional occupancy through marriage. He could live there. He could mow the lawn badly. He could brag at barbecues if he needed to feel taller. But he could not refinance it, could not sell it, could not borrow against it, could not use it as collateral for some bright, dangerous plan dressed up as family strategy. Grant knew we helped. He just never bothered to ask why the deed never carried his name. And Rachel knew more than she admitted. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know her father had not become some guest in that home. Enough to know Carol had put protection into every page. Before she died, Carol pressed the brass house key into my palm and said, "If he ever turns the house into a stage, Jack, watch what he does with the stairs." I thought she meant safety. I was a building inspector, after all. I understood stairs. Rise, run, handrail, landing. But after Thanksgiving, after Grant sent me below the family table like old luggage, those words came back different. I thought Carol was warning me about a staircase, but after Thanksgiving, I realized she had been warning me about the kind of man who sends family downward. I stayed in that basement longer than I needed to, not because I liked it down there, because shame has a way of making an old man very still. The folding chair creaked every time I shifted my weight. The washing machine hummed behind me, knocking once in a while like it was trying to remind the house I was still there. My paper plate sat on my knees. Cold turkey, a spoonful of stuffing, gravy that had gone thick at the edges. Upstairs, I could hear laughter through the floorboards. Forks tapped plates. Someone clapped at something Grant said. The whole house sounded alive above me, and I sat underneath it. That is a strange kind of pain. Not being shouted at, not being thrown out, just being placed lower, quietly enough that everyone can pretend it was reasonable. Theo came down first. He moved slowly on the stairs, carrying a slice of pumpkin pie with both hands like it was something fragile. "Grandpa," he whispered, "I brought you dessert." I looked up and forced a smile. "Well, that's kind of you." He set the pie on the card table beside me and looked around the basement. The laundry baskets, the stacked holiday boxes, the folding chair, the little paper plate on my lap. His face folded in confusion. "Why aren't you upstairs?" I took too long to answer. Children notice that. "Sometimes old men like quiet rooms," I said. Theo studied me. "But you don't look quiet. You look sad." There are questions adults can dodge. Children ask the ones that go straight under the ribs. Before I could find a gentler lie, Abby came down the stairs. She held her phone against her sweater. Her eyes were red, but she was trying very hard to look calm. "Grandpa," she said, "I recorded what Dad said." I stared at her. "What part?" Her hand tightened around the phone. "The basement grandpa part. And the real family part." Theo looked at her, then back at me. Real family. That phrase had already done its damage. Abby swallowed. "Do you want me to delete it?" I looked at my granddaughter, 16 years old, already learning that truth in a family can feel dangerous. "No," I said softly. "Don't delete the truth because adults made it ugly." She nodded, but her chin trembled. I wanted to tell her none of this was her burden. But I also knew something from 38 years of inspecting homes. If a crack shows in the wall, pretending not to see it does not save the house. It only gives the damage time to spread. A few minutes later, Russell Knox came down for soda from the basement fridge. Russell was Rachel's cousin, an appliance repairman with the hands of a man who had fixed more washing machines than most people had owned socks. He saw me in that chair and stopped cold. "Jack," he said quietly. "What the hell?" I lifted the paper plate a little. "Thanksgiving seating arrangement." His jaw tightened. "There are 2 empty chairs upstairs." I looked at him carefully. 2? Beside Nadine. Nobody's sitting there. That answered the question I had not wanted to ask. Grant had not run out of room. He had made room for humiliation. Russell grabbed 2 sodas from the fridge, then stood there like he could not decide whether to go back upstairs or stay and apologize for something he had not done. Finally, he said, Nadine laughed when Grant said basement seating sounded cozy. I nodded once. Some people laugh because something is funny. Some people laugh because cruelty makes them feel included. Russell lowered his voice. Grant said something else when Rachel walked away. I looked up. What? He told Nadine he needs to learn where he fits. The basement seemed colder after that. Where he fits. Not where I could sit. Not where there was space. Where I fit. A man can spend his whole life building shelter for people and still end up learning they have assigned him a corner. After Russell went upstairs, I stood and walked toward a trash bag near the stairs. A paper place card had fallen beside it. I bent slowly and picked it up. My name was written in Rachel's handwriting, Jack. Then someone had crossed it out with black marker. Under it, in block letters, one word had been added. Basement. I held that card for a long time, long enough for the upstairs laughter to fade into something far away. That was not a joke. That was not a crowded table. That was planning. When I finally climbed the stairs, I stopped halfway. Grant's voice carried from the dining room. Once he stops acting like the house is still his decision, Rachel can finally breathe. Nobody corrected him. Not Rachel. Not anyone. And that was when I understood the basement was not the insult. It was the rehearsal. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up before the sun. Old men do that sometimes. Not because we are rested, because our thoughts start making noise before the world does. I sat at my kitchen table with Carol's brass key in front of me and the place card beside it. Jack, crossed out, basement. I kept looking at that word. It is strange how 6 or 7 letters can weigh more than a whole argument. I had been insulted before. Any man who worked county inspections for 38 years has been called worse by homeowners who did not enjoy hearing their deck was unsafe or their basement wiring could burn the place down. But this was different. This came from inside the family. That makes the wound harder to name. Around 9, I drove back to Rachel's house with Carol's old pie carrier on the passenger seat. That was the excuse. I did not need an excuse. But fathers sometimes invent errands when they are afraid asking directly will make their daughters choose. Rachel opened the door. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back, and her eyes were puffy in a way she tried to hide by turning toward the kitchen too quickly. "Dad," she said, "you didn't have to bring that back today." "I know." I stepped inside. The house smelled like reheated coffee, turkey bones, and lemon cleaner. The dining room was already cleared, too cleared. Like Grant wanted the evidence of the night before wiped away before it could become memory. Rachel took the pie carrier from my hands. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I asked the simplest question I could. Was the table really full? Her face changed. Not much, just enough. She placed the pie carrier on the counter and wiped a spot that did not need wiping. "Dad, Thanksgiving was hectic." "That is not an answer." She swallowed. Grant was trying to keep things organized. Organized. There was another clean word. People use it when the honest word would make them ashamed. I looked toward the dining room. Were there empty chairs? Rachel closed her eyes. That was enough. I did not raise my voice. If I had, she might have hidden behind the noise, so I stayed quiet. "Rachel," I said, "I do not need you to be perfect. I need you to be honest." Her eyes filled fast. But before she could answer, Grant's voice came from somewhere upstairs. "Who's here?" Rachel flinched. That small movement told me more than any confession. "Just Dad," she called. Just Dad. I felt that too. Grant appeared at the top of the stairs wearing a quarter-zip sweater and the expression of a man annoyed that reality had knocked before he finished controlling the room. "Jack," he said, "didn't expect you this morning." I returned Carol's pie carrier. His eyes flicked to the counter, then to me. Very thoughtful. Everything about him sounded polite. Nothing about him felt kind. I did not mention the place card. Not yet. A building inspector learns not to point at every crack the moment he sees it. Sometimes you watch where the water runs first. Grant smiled. "Well, we're still recovering from hosting. Big house, big holiday. You know how it is." I looked around the kitchen. "Yes," I said. "I know houses." His smile tightened. I left a few minutes later. Rachel walked me to the porch but did not step outside. That mattered. She was still standing in the house like it belonged to Grant's mood. As I crossed the driveway, a voice called from across the street. "Jack Badman?" I turned. Faith Lowell stood near her mailbox with a wool cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders. Faith was 69, retired from teaching middle school, and had the eyes of a woman who had spent 30 years knowing exactly when children were lying before they finished the sentence. She had known Carol through the community center classes. Faith pointed at the house behind me. "You all right after yesterday?" I gave the old answer men give when they are not. "I'm fine." She stared at me. "I taught 7th grade for 30 years. A lying adult is just a tall student with better shoes." That almost made me smile. Almost. She waved me over. I crossed the street. Faith lowered her voice. "Few days before Thanksgiving, a man came here with Grant. Clipboard, tablet, little badge on a lanyard. Looked like an appraiser." My chest tightened. "An appraiser?" She nodded. "They walked the outside first. Took pictures of the garage, back patio, side yard. Then Grant showed him the basement entrance." "The basement?" "Twice." I looked back at the house. The windows reflected the gray morning sky. Faith continued. "I was raking leaves by the maple, not spying." Faith. "All right, maybe spying a little. Retirement is quiet." This time, I did smile, but it faded quickly. "What did you hear?" She adjusted her cardigan. "The appraiser asked something about separate entry potential. Grant said the basement could work as rental offset if the family got smart about equity." Rental offset, equity. There it was again, the language Grant used when he forgot a house had people inside it. Faith looked at me carefully. Then Grant said, "My father-in-law doesn't understand modern equity." I felt the brass key in my pocket grow heavy. Faith's face softened. "Carol would have hated that." "Yes," I said. "She would have." Carol did not hate many things, but she hated financial cleverness that made families unsafe. On the drive home, I kept seeing the basement stairs in my mind. Not as stairs anymore, as a message. Down there for me. Upstairs, for them. And somewhere behind that insult, maybe a loan officer, an appraiser, or some paper trail Grant had started before I ever picked up that cold turkey plate. When I got home, I called Helen Ward. I planned to tell her everything in order. The dinner, the folding chair, the place card, Faith's appraiser. But Helen answered with a voice that told me she had already been waiting. "Jack," she said, "I was going to call you today." My hand tightened around the phone. "Why?" A title company flagged a refinance inquiry on the Badman Trust property. For a second, the kitchen went very still. Then I looked down at Carol's brass key on the table, and I finally understood. The basement was not just where Grant wanted me to eat. It was where he wanted my authority buried. Helen Ward's office was above a small accounting firm on a side street near the courthouse. No marble floors, no glass walls, just old wooden doors, quiet lamps, and shelves full of binders that looked boring enough to save a family. Carol always liked Helen. She said a good lawyer should not make you feel impressed. A good lawyer should make you feel protected. When I walked in, Helen already had a folder waiting on her desk. She stood when she saw me. "Jack," she said gently. That worried me more than if she had sounded angry. Helen Ward was not a dramatic woman. She had silver hair, careful hands, and the kind of calm voice people use when they are about to explain something that could ruin a holiday forever. I sat across from her. She did not ask if I wanted coffee. She knew I would not drink it. Instead, she opened the folder and turned the first page toward me. "This came from Neil Porter," she said, "escrow officer at the title company." I looked down. "Refinance inquiry. Badman Family Housing Trust property. Rachel Pryor residence." The words sat there like a cold weight. I had inspected thousands of documents in my life. Permits, violation notices, occupancy reports, inspection summaries. Most bad news announces itself in plain language if you know where to look. This one did. Grant Pryor was listed as primary contact. Rachel was listed as household representative. My name appeared nowhere on the first page. Not as trustee. Not as owner representative. Not as anything. That told me the document had either been prepared by someone careless or someone hoping nobody would notice. Helen watched my face. "Keep reading." So I did. Cash out strategy, equity access, debt consolidation, basement conversion potential, rental offset estimate, family support narrative. Then I saw the phrase that made my fingers stop. Elder non-participation noted. I read it twice, then a third time. "What does that mean?" Helen folded her hands. "It means someone described you as no longer involved in household decision-making." I looked out at her. I was sitting next to a washing machine while they carved turkey. Her eyes did not move from mine. "I know." For a moment, I could hear Grant's voice again. "Main table is for real family," and Theo's softer voice beneath it. "Grandpa, why aren't you real family tonight?" Something inside me shifted then. Not rage, exactly. Rage burns hot and fast. This was colder, sharper. "My daughter lives in that house," I said. "Yes." "My grandchildren sleep in that house." "Yes." "My wife sold our cottage so they could have that house." Helen nodded. "And Grant is trying to describe me like I drifted away from it." "That is what the language suggests." I put my palm flat on the page. The paper crinkled. "My loneliness is not your loan strategy." Helen was silent for 2 seconds. Then she picked up a pen and wrote the sentence in her notes. "That belongs in the case file." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because Carol would have liked that. She always believed plain truth should be written down before clever people could decorate it. Helen turned another page. "There is no approved refinance, no signed trustee consent, no valid authorization from this office, but there was an inquiry. From Grant. Through a broker. Name? Bryce Keller." I had never heard it. That bothered me. Good schemes often begin with names nobody in the family recognizes. Helen continued. "Neil flagged it because the property is trust-held, and the language around control was inconsistent. The broker asked whether family consent could move the process forward without formal trustee approval." I leaned back slowly. By family consent, he meant Rachel. Likely. I stared at the folder. There is a special kind of insult in being treated like paperwork someone hopes to route around. I had been sent downstairs for dinner. Now I was being sent around in documents. Same strategy, different staircase. Before I tell you what Grant tried to do with that house, let me ask you something. If your son-in-law sent you to the basement on Thanksgiving, called you the basement grandpa, and your own daughter said nothing, would you forgive it to keep the holiday peaceful? Or would you call the lawyer before he touched one more paper? Tell me honestly what you would have done. Because I sat in Helen Ward's office that morning with the trust folder open between us, and for one weak moment, I still wanted to protect Rachel from embarrassment. That is what fathers do. Even when daughters fail them, Fathers look for a way to make the fall softer. But Carol's voice came back to me. A house should protect a family, not become bait for greed. Helen slid a yellow legal pad toward me. We need a timeline. So I gave her one. The Thanksgiving dinner, Grant's comment, the cold plate, the basement chair, Theo bringing pie, Abby's video, Russell saying there were empty chairs, the crossed-out place card, Faith seeing the appraiser, Grant's words about modern equity. Helen wrote without interrupting. When I finished, she removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. That is not enough by itself to prove financial intent, she said, but it is enough to show a pattern. A pattern of what? Isolation, misrepresentation, pressure. Those 3 words felt heavier than shouting. Helen picked up the phone and called Neil Porter while I sat there. She put him on speaker. Neil, I'm with Jack Badman now. I need you to confirm what the broker asked. A man's careful voice came through. Yes, Ms. Ward. The broker asked whether the trustee could be bypassed with family consent. My chest tightened. Helen glanced at me before continuing. Exact language? Papers shuffled on Neil's end. He said the family was aligned except for an older relative who had stepped back from household involvement. I closed my eyes. Older relative. That was me now. Not father, not grandfather, not trustee. Older relative. Helen's voice stayed calm. And why did you flag it? Because the deed is trust-held, and the inquiry treated Mr. and Mrs. Pryor like owners. That did not match title. There it was, the first clean crack in Grant's story. Helen thanked him and ended the call. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, Jack, I need Abby's video, if she is willing. I need the place card. I need Faith's statement. I need Russell's statement. And I need any messages from Grant or Rachel discussing refinance, equity, or your role. I nodded. What happens if he keeps pushing? Helen's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Then the dignity occupancy clause may become relevant. I had not heard those words out loud in years. Carol had insisted on them. Back then, I thought she was being too careful. Now, I wished she had been sitting beside me so I could apologize. Helen opened another section of the trust binder. Carol wanted this clause included because she worried the home could become a tool of control, not only over Rachel, over you. Me? Yes. She pointed to the paragraph. The clause covered humiliation, isolation from family access, misrepresentation of ownership, coercive financial pressure, and any attempt to use the residence as collateral without trustee consent. My throat tightened. Carol had known. Maybe not the exact dinner, not the cold turkey, not the folding chair. But she had known what kind of man uses a house to make himself taller. Helen closed the binder gently. Grant can call that house his all he wants at Thanksgiving. But title, trust, and intent still matter. I stared at the brass key in my hand. It had warmed in my palm. For the first time since I walked down those basement stairs, I felt something besides shame. Not victory, not yet. Something steadier, a foundation under my feet. Then my phone buzzed, a message from Abby. Grandpa, I found another picture from Thanksgiving. It shows your place card before Dad crossed it out. A second message came right after, and Mom saw him do it. I looked at Helen. She saw my face and knew. What is it? I turned the phone so she could read. Helen's mouth tightened. Then Rachel is not just a witness, she said quietly. She is part of the silence. That was the first time I understood Grant was not trying to borrow against a house. He was trying to borrow against all of us, pretending not to see what he had done. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I met Russell Knox at a diner off Route 30. Not one of those polished places with Edison bulbs and $12 burgers. A real diner. Brown coffee, scratched booths, waitresses who call everybody honey, whether they like you or not. Russell was already there when I arrived, sitting near the window with a trucker cap beside his coffee mug. He looked uncomfortable before I even sat down. That told me he had come to tell the truth. People who plan to lie usually arrive relaxed. "Jack," he said quietly. I slid into the booth. "Morning." A waitress poured coffee into my mug without asking. Russell stared at the steam for a second before speaking again. I should have said something that night. "At Thanksgiving?" He nodded once. I stirred cream into my coffee slowly. "No one did." Russell rubbed his jaw. "That's the problem." Outside the diner window, a school bus rolled past in the gray Pennsylvania morning. The world looked painfully normal. That bothered me. Families can begin breaking apart while traffic lights still change on schedule. Russell leaned closer. There were 2 empty chairs upstairs. I looked at him carefully. "You're sure?" "One beside me, one beside Nadine." That confirmed it fully. Grant had not improvised the humiliation. He had planned it. Russell exhaled through his nose. When Grant said basement seating sounded funny, Nadine laughed. I laughed a little too. His face tightened. "I hate that I did." I shook my head slowly. People laugh when they want to stay welcome at the table. "That doesn't make it right." "No," I said. "It doesn't." The waitress brought eggs and toast neither of us had much appetite for. Russell tore his toast in half without eating it. "Rachel saw the place card before dinner." That landed harder than I expected. Not because I did not suspect it, because hearing it out loud made it real. "She saw him cross it out?" Russell nodded. "He used a black marker right there in the kitchen." I could picture it too clearly. The bright kitchen lights, the turkey smell. Grant standing over a place card like he was assigning seating at some cheap banquet. What did Rachel say? She told him not to make a scene. I stared at my coffee. Not stop. Not, don't humiliate my father. Just, don't make a scene. Russell lowered his voice. Grant laughed and said, "Relax. He needs to learn where he fits." That sentence again. Where he fits. Like I was a chair being moved around a room. Russell finally took a bite of toast and chewed slowly before speaking again. "You know what bothered me most?" "What?" He kept talking about the basement like it wasn't even part of the family space anymore. I looked up. "What do you mean?" He told Nadine that once they finished converting it, the place could practically pay for itself. There it was again. Pay for itself. Grant talked about houses the way gamblers talk about lucky machines. Not shelter, not safety. Output, income, leverage. Russell shook his head. He even joked about adding a separate entrance if the equity plan worked. I thought about Faith Lowell watching the appraiser measure the basement access. The pieces were starting to fit together now. Not neatly, but enough to see the shape of the thing. Russell reached into his jacket pocket and slid his phone across the table. There's something else. On the screen was a blurry photo taken Thanksgiving afternoon. The upstairs dining table, 2 empty chairs visible near the end, and in the corner of the picture, my folded walker leaning against the wall upstairs. Not downstairs. Upstairs, waiting for me. I stared at the image for a long moment. Grant had not only planned where I would sit, he had planned where I would not belong. "Can you send this to Helen Ward?" I asked quietly. Russell nodded immediately. "Already did this morning." I looked at him. "You called her yourself?" "She left me a voicemail asking questions. I figured if I stayed quiet after that dinner, then I was helping him." That mattered more than he probably realized, because families do not collapse only from cruel people. They collapse when decent people decide silence is easier. Russell finally met my eyes fully. "Jack, Grant's in debt." That was new. I leaned back slightly. "What kind of debt?" "Truck payments, credit cards, some investment thing that went bad. I don't know all of it." "How do you know?" "My cousin works with a guy at the roofing supplier Grant uses. Word is, he's behind on more than one account." I said nothing. Russell continued. "And Rachel's trying to keep up appearances. Private soccer camp for Theo. dance travel weekends for Abby, bigger mortgage lifestyle, all of it. There it was. Not evil movie villain greed, something worse. Ordinary American pressure wearing expensive shoes. In 2026, people were drowning quietly everywhere. Insurance spikes, mortgage rates, credit debt. Families smiling in kitchen photos while praying the debit card still worked tomorrow morning. I understood pressure, but pressure does not excuse humiliation. A storm explains a roof leak. It does not excuse the man who ignores it. Russell pointed at my coffee mug. You know what scares me? What? He doesn't think he's stealing. That sentence stayed with me, because he was right. Grant probably believed he was unlocking opportunity, using equity, optimizing assets, modernizing wealth. People rarely call themselves greedy anymore. They rename it strategy. My phone buzzed on the table. Rachel. Russell looked away politely. I answered. Hi, sweetheart. Her breathing sounded uneven. Dad, Abby told me you've been talking to people. People. Russell. Helen. Neighbors. I looked at Russell. He stared very hard at the sugar dispenser. Yes, I said calmly. Rachel's voice dropped. Grant says you're trying to turn the family against him. I almost laughed at that. A man sends his father-in-law to the basement, and suddenly accountability becomes division. Rachel, I said quietly, did you know he contacted refinance people? Silence, not surprise. Silence. My chest tightened. You knew. We were only exploring options. We? Her breathing hitched. Dad, everything costs more now. We're trying to stay ahead. I looked out the diner window at the gray parking lot. When your mother was dying, I said softly, she sold the last house she loved so you and those children would never have to worry about losing a roof. Rachel started crying immediately. But tears are not always innocence. Sometimes they are guilt finally running out of places to hide. Dad? No, I said gently. Listen to me. I kept my voice calm because anger would have let her retreat behind fear. I don't need a perfect daughter. I need an honest one. She covered the phone for a second. I heard Grant's voice somewhere in the background asking who she was talking to. Rachel lowered her voice immediately after that, and that frightened me more than shouting would have. Dad, Grant says if you fight the refinance, you're proving you use the house to control us. I closed my eyes. There it was. The real accusation. Not basement grandpa. Not awkward holiday jokes. Control. Grant wanted protection to look like manipulation. He wanted dignity to look like interference. Slowly, I opened my eyes again. Rachel, I said, pressure does not make a man cruel. It only shows what cruelty was already waiting there. She did not answer. Neither of us hung up. For a few seconds, all I could hear was distant movement inside that house. Cabinets closing, footsteps overhead, a television somewhere in another room. The sounds of people living under a roof my wife had sacrificed to protect. Then Rachel whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. He said Thanksgiving would help reset the family. A chill moved through me. Reset the family. Not celebrate it. Not gather it. Reset it. I looked at Russell across the booth, and for the first time, I realized Grant Pryor had never seen that house as a home. Only as a structure, waiting for him to become the most important man inside it. 2 days after my conversation with Rachel, I sat across from Helen Ward again. This time, she brought the entire trust binder. Not copies, not summaries. The real binder Carol helped build at our dining room table while chemo treatments still made her hands shake. Helen placed it carefully between us like something alive. Dark blue leather, gold lettering, Badman Family Housing Trust, residential protection file. For a moment, neither of us touched it. Outside the office window, December rain slid slowly down the courthouse glass. People crossed the street carrying coffee cups and grocery bags, while my whole family balanced on paperwork, Most of them did not even understand existed. Helen finally opened the binder. "Jack," she said quietly, "before we go further, I need you to hear something clearly." I nodded. This trust was not created to punish Rachel. I know. It was created because Carol believed love without protection eventually becomes leverage. That sounded exactly like my wife. Helen adjusted her glasses and began turning pages. The first section showed the original purchase structure from 3 years earlier. Sale of our cottage, insurance distribution, savings transfer, trust funding documents, then the purchase order for Rachel's house. Every number on those pages carried memory. The cottage sale hurt Carol deeply. She pretended it did not, but I knew better. That cottage held 30 years of ordinary happiness. Christmas lights tangled in old boxes, coffee on screened mornings. The porch swing Theo used to fall asleep on when he was little. We sold all of it because Carol wanted Rachel and the children protected before she died. Not comfortable, protected. Helen tapped a section with her pen. The deed is held entirely under the trust. I nodded slowly. And the controlling trustee is still you. There it was. Not dramatic, not shouted, just written plainly in black ink. Jack Badman, controlling trustee. I looked at the words longer than I expected to, because Thanksgiving had almost made me forget. A folding chair and a cold plate can make a man feel smaller than paper. Helen continued. Rachel is listed as protected resident beneficiary. Another page turned. Abby and Theo are future educational and housing beneficiaries. Then another. Grant Pryor has conditional occupancy rights through marriage only. I leaned back slightly. He never read any of this, did he? Helen gave a tired smile. Grant signed occupancy acknowledgments during closing. But no, I do not believe he ever understood the structure. That tracked perfectly. Grant loved the appearance of ownership more than the details of responsibility. Helen slid another page toward me. He can reside in the home. He can contribute financially. He can claim residency for tax and utility purposes. But he cannot refinance, sell, collateralize, or represent ownership authority over the property. I looked up. And the inquiry? Unauthorized. The word settled heavily in the room. Not technically complicated, not emotional, just clean, unauthorized. Helen turned several pages deeper into the binder. This, she said quietly, is the section Carol insisted we draft personally. At the top of the page were the words, Dignity Occupancy Clause. Even reading the title tightened something in my chest. I remembered arguing with Carol about it years ago. I had told her the wording sounded excessive. She told me people become most dangerous when money and embarrassment start sharing the same room. I wish more husbands listened to their wives before grief turns them into historians. Helen read aloud. If any occupant of the protected residence uses the property to humiliate, isolate, manipulate, or financially pressure an elder benefactor, resident beneficiary, or dependent child, the trustee reserves authority to suspend financial cooperation, review occupancy conditions, and restrict collateral-based actions involving the residents. The office went quiet. Rain tapped the window softly. I stared at the paragraph while Thanksgiving replayed itself in my mind. The basement stairs, the folded chair, the paper plate. Theo asking why I was not real family. Carol had seen the possibility of this years before it happened. Not the exact words, not the basement, but the pattern. Helen continued. There is more. She turned another page. Carol's handwriting appeared at the bottom in blue ink. A house should never become a stage where one family member stands taller by forcing another lower. I swallowed hard. That sentence sounded like her voice, not polished, not theatrical. Just true. Helen let me sit with it before continuing. Neil Porter confirmed the refinance inquiry. Attempted to frame Grant and Rachel as primary household authorities while minimizing trustee involvement. In other words, I said slowly, they wanted me treated like background furniture. Helen's expression tightened. Yes. I rubbed my thumb against the brass key in my pocket. What happens now? That depends. On what? Whether Grant stops. I almost laughed. Men like Grant never stop because somebody politely notices the first crack. They stop when consequences finally cost more than arrogance. Helen folded her hands together. The trust gives you significant authority, Jack, but I want to be realistic. This is not a magic weapon. I know. You cannot throw Grant onto the lawn because of one ugly Thanksgiving. I do not want to. And I meant that. Despite everything, Rachel still loved him. Theo still ran toward him when he got home. Abby still watched the front window every evening when his truck pulled in. Families are complicated that way. Love does not disappear just because respect does. Helen nodded slowly, relieved perhaps that I still sounded like myself. The trust allows you to block refinance attempts immediately. It allows us to suspend trust communication privileges if misrepresentation continues. It also allows occupancy review if coercion or financial manipulation escalates. Occupancy review, I repeated. Yes, especially if the property is being used to isolate you from household access or create pressure narratives around age and participation. There it was again. Participation. Like I had become a man slowly fading from relevance instead of the person who helped build the roof itself. Helen reached into the binder again and removed a folded sheet. Carol also added this. I unfolded it carefully. At the top, in her handwriting, family table addendum. I almost smiled through the ache in my chest. Only Carol would attach morality to real estate law. Helen spoke softly. She wanted it included if there were ever children involved in a dignity violation. I kept reading. No child should learn that love has assigned seating. My eyes blurred for a second, because that was the real damage, wasn't it? Not my embarrassment. Theo had watched adults rank human value by dining room position. Abby had learned that truth in families sometimes needs video evidence. Carol had been trying to protect them from that lesson all along. Helen broke the silence carefully. Jack, Grant may not fully understand what he walked into. I looked up slowly. Oh, I think he understands more than he pretends. Helen tilted her head slightly. What do you mean? I leaned back in the chair. Men like Grant always know when a room belongs to someone else. That's why they try so hard to dominate it. For a while, we reviewed documents, timelines, occupancy conditions, and communication records. Helen highlighted sections Neil Porter wanted preserved if legal review became necessary. Then she paused over one email attachment. Her expression changed immediately. What is it? I asked. She turned the screen toward me. It was an updated communication from Bryce Keller. Subject line, prior residence cash-out strategy, revised numbers. My stomach tightened. Helen opened the attachment, projected equity access, vehicle debt consolidation, basement conversion estimate, projected rental offset income, then one line near the bottom, family hierarchy expected to stabilize following Thanksgiving boundary reset. The office became very still. Helen stared at the screen. I stared at the screen. Thanksgiving boundary reset. Not dinner. Not misunderstanding, not family stress. Reset. That was when the full shape of it finally emerged. Grant had not sent me to the basement because he lost patience. He sent me there because he believed humiliation could reposition authority inside the house. If he could push me lower emotionally, then maybe paperwork would eventually push me lower legally too. Helen closed the laptop slowly. Jack, she said quietly, I think Grant Pryor has already started spending money he never legally controlled. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I realized the house Carol died protecting was already being treated like collateral by the man sitting at her daughter's table. I did not go back to Rachel's house for almost a week. Not because I was afraid of Grant, because I was afraid of what I might still forgive. That is one of the hardest truths old parents carry. Sometimes we do not avoid our children because they hurt us. We avoid them because part of us is still willing to excuse it. December settled heavily over Lancaster County that year. Gray skies, bare trees, grocery prices climbing every week while television people argued about the economy like families were numbers instead of exhausted human beings trying to keep the lights on. I spent most mornings sitting at my kitchen table with Carol's trust binder open beside me, not reading it, just keeping it near, like a handrail. 3 days after Helen showed me the Bryce Keller documents, Abby called, not texted, called. That alone told me something was wrong. "Grandpa?" Her voice sounded tight and shaky. "What happened? Can you come over?" My chest tightened immediately. "Is Theo okay?" "Yes." "Rachel?" "She's okay too." Then she whispered something that made my stomach turn cold. "Dad's downstairs with a contractor." I grabbed my coat without another question. The drive to the house felt longer than usual. Winter rain hit the windshield in soft, uneven patterns, while Carol's words kept replaying in my head. "Watch what he does with the stairs." When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a white SUV parked near the curb. Keller Property Solutions. There it was. Not theory anymore, not paperwork. A truck in front of the house. I stepped inside without knocking. Grant's voice carried from below. "If we open this section up, the separate entrance flow works way better." Another man laughed softly. "Yeah, you could offset a huge chunk of the mortgage down here." Mortgage. Not trust property, not family residence, mortgage. I stood in the foyer listening to strangers discuss my wife's sacrifice like they were flipping a rental unit. Rachel appeared from the kitchen when she heard the door. Her face lost color immediately. "Dad!" I looked at her. "Where are the kids?" "Theo's upstairs, Abby's room." I nodded once, then I walked toward the basement stairs. Rachel grabbed my arm gently. "Please don't do this right now." I looked down at her hand, then at her eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear there instead of disagreement. Not fear of me, fear of what happened if Grant lost control of the room. That realization hurt more than the basement ever did. I went downstairs anyway. Grant stood beside a man in a gray contractor jacket holding a tablet full of measurements. The folding chair was still there, same spot, beside the washing machine. The paper place card sat on a workbench nearby under a screwdriver and tape measure. Basement. Like somebody had left the insult out in the open because they no longer respected me enough to hide it. Grant turned sharply when he saw me. "Jack!" The contractor straightened awkwardly. Grant forced a smile. "You should have called first." I looked around slowly. Fresh chalk marks on the concrete wall. Measurement tape stretched near the side entrance. A printed layout sketch on the table. The basement was already becoming numbers in Grant's head. Not memory, not family. Yield. "What's this?" I asked calmly. Grant shoved his hands into his pockets. "Just exploring options." "Rental conversion options?" Rachel appeared halfway down the stairs behind me. "Dad?" "No," I said softly, without looking at her. "Let him answer." Grant's jaw tightened. "With the economy right now, everybody's using equity smarter." There was that word again. Smarter. As if compassion were financially outdated. I walked toward the folding chair slowly. The contractor looked deeply uncomfortable now. Good. Some discomfort deserved witnesses. I touched the chair lightly. "This where future tenants sit too?" Grant exhaled hard through his nose. "You're twisting this." "Am I?" The contractor quietly began gathering his things. Grant noticed and immediately tried recovering the room. "Hey, nobody's attacking anybody here?" Nobody. That word men use right after humiliating someone personally. I looked at the contractor. "What's your name?" "Darren." "Darren," I said gently, "did anyone explain this property is held under a family trust?" His eyes shifted immediately toward Grant. That was answer enough. Grant stepped forward. This doesn't concern him. I turned back to Grant. No, it concerns you. Silence filled the basement. Even the washing machine seemed quieter. Then Theo appeared at the top of the stairs holding a crayon drawing. Grandpa? Every adult in the room froze slightly. Theo walked down carefully and handed me the paper. Stick figures, dining table, pumpkin pie, and one little figure downstairs beside a square shape labeled chair. Underneath, in uneven child handwriting, Grandpa ate downstairs. That broke something inside me. Not loudly, quietly. The dangerous kind of break. Rachel covered her mouth. Grant looked away. Even Darren stared at the floor, because suddenly this was not about refinancing anymore. A child had documented humiliation like it was normal family architecture. Theo pointed at the picture, innocently. I made it at school. I knelt slowly beside him. You drew this? He nodded proudly. Dad said downstairs was your spot now. Rachel started crying immediately. Grant snapped, Theo, go upstairs. But Theo looked confused. Did I do something wrong? No child should ever ask that question for telling the truth. I stood back up carefully. The basement felt smaller now, lower, meaner. I looked at Rachel. Did you know he brought contractors here? She wiped tears from her cheeks. I knew he was talking to people. About converting the basement? Silence. That was answer enough, too. Grant stepped forward again, irritated now that control kept slipping through his fingers. We are trying to survive financially. I stared at him. You think survival means teaching children who belongs upstairs? His face hardened. You keep acting like this house revolves around your feelings. I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny. Because men like Grant always mistake dignity for ego when someone older refuses humiliation. I picked up Theo's drawing carefully. Then I picked up the crossed-out place card. Basement. 2 pieces of paper. One from a child. One from an adult. Same message. I turned toward the stairs. Grant called after me. Running to Helen Ward again won't stop reality. I stopped halfway up. Then I looked back at him. No, Grant, I said quietly. Reality is exactly what's about to stop you. Outside, the rain had turned colder. I sat in my truck for almost 10 minutes before starting the engine. Theo's drawing rested on the passenger seat beside the brass key. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I allowed myself to say the truth out loud. I had not bought that house to keep Rachel comfortable. Carol and I bought it to keep her safe. And somewhere along the way, comfort became the thing that taught her to stay silent. My phone buzzed. A message from Helen Ward. Bryce Keller just sent revised refinance projections. You need to see this immediately. A second message arrived before I could answer. Grant estimated future basement rental income before legal approval. I stared at the screen, then at Theo's drawing, and suddenly I understood something terrifying. Grant Pryor was not planning around the house anymore. He was already spending money from a basement he did not legally control. The next morning, Helen Ward asked me to come in immediately. Not later, not after lunch. Immediately. That word sat heavily in my chest during the entire drive. Winter rain followed me again across Lancaster County, turning parking lots silver and making traffic lights glow blurry through the windshield. The radio talked about interest rates, consumer debt, and Americans borrowing against home equity at the highest levels in years. I turned it off. I had already heard enough about people trying to turn houses into lifeboats while drilling holes through the floor. When I walked into Helen's office, the refinance file was spread across her conference table. 3 folders now, not 1. That was the first thing I noticed. Helen looked tired. So did Neil Porter, who sat near the end of the table with reading glasses hanging low on his nose. I nodded politely. Mr. Porter. Jack! Nobody smiled. Helen gestured toward the folders. Bryce Keller sent revised projections last night. I sat down slowly. Neil slid the first folder toward me. Inside were charts, debt summaries, projected refinance figures, and something labeled prior residence cash-out strategy. Not trust property, not family residence, prior residence. Like Grant had already mentally transferred ownership through confidence alone, Helen tapped one section with her pen. Read this line. I did. Projected equity release, $418,000. My stomach tightened. Not because of the number itself, because men do dangerous things when they start counting money that does not belong to them yet. Neil adjusted his glasses. The proposal estimated paying off vehicle loans, consolidating credit debt, funding basement conversion, and creating liquidity for future investment property acquisition. Investment property, I repeated quietly. Helen nodded. We believe Grant planned to leverage this house into additional rentals. I stared at the pages, the basement, the appraiser, the contractor, the folding chair. Suddenly, all of it connected. The basement was never just punishment. It was rehearsal for future use. I kept reading. Luxury SUV refinance payoff, business debt settlement, home office renovation, projected rental income from lower-level conversion. Then another line stopped me cold. Family elder participation expected to reduce following holiday transition event. Holiday transition event. That was Thanksgiving. That was me carrying cold turkey downstairs while my grandson asked why I was not real family. Grant had turned humiliation into strategy language. For a few seconds, I could not speak. Neil finally broke the silence. The wording is careful, but the implication matters. I looked at him. He was documenting me out of the house. Neil nodded once. Essentially. The room went quiet again. I thought about all the years Carol taught women at the community center how to read loan paperwork carefully. She used to tell them banks never say, "We're trapping you." They say, "Flexible opportunity." They say, "Simplified solution." Danger always arrives wearing polished language. Helen turned another page. There's more. A timeline chart appeared. Thanksgiving dinner, refinance consultation, projected basement conversion start, estimated equity access window, possible rental listing target by spring 2027. This had been planned before the turkey thawed. My chest tightened so sharply I had to sit back. Not because Grant wanted money, because he had already reorganized the family in his mind around obtaining it. Helen's voice softened slightly. Jack, Rachel may not have understood the full financial structure. I looked at her carefully, but she understood enough. Yes, that mattered. Rachel did not create the plan, but she kept standing beside the man building it. Neil opened another document. This came from Bryce Keller's internal notes. I read silently. Client reports father-in-law emotionally attached to residence despite limited functional involvement. Client believes household authority transition necessary before refinance cooperation possible. Household authority transition. That phrase made my jaw tighten. Grant did not see me as family anymore. He saw me as an obstacle to reposition. I looked out the rain-streaked office window and suddenly remembered something Carol once said while grading papers at our old cottage kitchen table. Some people don't want gratitude, Jack. They want replacement. Back then, I thought she meant jobs or politics. Now I understood. Grant did not want appreciation for joining the family. He wanted ownership of the hierarchy itself. Helen leaned forward slightly. There's another issue. I looked back at her. The projected refinance assumes future trustee non-interference. My eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Neil answered carefully. It means Bryce Keller believed Grant expected your authority to become irrelevant. The room felt colder after that. Not because of the rain, because somebody had already started planning my disappearance from decision-making. Not physically, socially, emotionally, legally. The basement had been step one. Lower the old man, isolate him quietly, frame him as outdated, then borrow against the silence. I rubbed my hand slowly across the table. My wife died trying to keep that house from becoming leverage. Helen's expression softened. I know. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then my phone buzzed. Rachel. I stared at the screen before answering. Hi. Her breathing sounded uneven again. Dad, Grant says people are spreading lies now. I almost laughed. Truth becomes lies very quickly when paperwork starts surfacing. Rachel, I said calmly, did you know about the $400,000 refinance projection? Silence. Not confusion. Silence. That answered enough. Finally, she whispered, I knew he wanted to consolidate debt. Did you know he planned to convert the basement? He said it could help us survive. Us. That word again. Families use us carefully when guilt arrives. I looked down at Theo's drawing sitting beside the refinance folder. Grandpa ate downstairs. Rachel, I said softly, your mother sold her last home so your children would never grow up learning people become less valuable when money gets tight. I heard her crying quietly. Then something unexpected happened. Not denial, not excuses, just exhaustion. He keeps saying we're drowning, she whispered. That hurt. Because I believed her. In 2026, middle-class families all across America were quietly drowning under groceries, insurance, car payments, school costs, medical bills, and debt disguised as normal living. Grant was not wrong about pressure. He was wrong about what pressure allowed him to become. I kept my voice steady. Being afraid financially does not give a man permission to humiliate people. Rachel cried harder after that, and for the first time, I realized something important. Rachel was not protecting Grant because she respected what he was doing. She was protecting the version of stability she was terrified to lose. The big kitchen, the good school district, the appearance of success, the house, especially the house. Then Rachel whispered something that made the room go still. He said if you backed away after Thanksgiving, refinancing would get easier. Helen closed her eyes briefly. Neil muttered something under his breath I could not quite hear, but I heard enough. Grant had expected humiliation to simplify paperwork. I ended the call gently after that. Not because the conversation was finished, because I finally understood its shape. Helen looked at me carefully. What are you thinking? I stared at the refinance charts spread across the table, then at Carol's brass key beside them. I'm thinking Grant Pryor never wanted me downstairs because he hated me. Helen stayed quiet. He wanted me downstairs because houses have levels, I continued softly. And he thought if he pushed me low enough emotionally, eventually the documents would follow. Neil leaned back heavily in his chair. There's one more thing you should know. I looked at him. He slid over a final printed email. Internal broker note. Projected trustee resistance manageable if daughter alignment remains stable. Daughter alignment. Rachel, not daughter, alignment. Like she had become part of an acquisition strategy. My chest hurt in a completely different way after reading that. Not anger anymore, grief. Because somewhere between debt and fear and appearances, my daughter had stopped sounding like family inside other people's paperwork. Helen finally closed the folders one by one. The sound echoed softly through the room. Jack, she said carefully, I think it's time. I looked at her. Time for what? Helen folded her hands together. To bring everyone back to the dining room and ask who actually owns that house. And suddenly, for the first time since Thanksgiving, I knew the next family dinner was going to end very differently from the last one. The next Sunday, everyone came back to the house. Not for Thanksgiving, not for Christmas, for a meeting. That was the word Helen Ward used, meeting. But every person walking through that front door knew it was really something else. An accounting. Outside, the December sky hung low and gray over Lancaster County. Inside, The dining room looked exactly the same as Thanksgiving night. Same chandelier, same polished table, same staircase leading down toward the basement. Only this time, I carried the folding chair upstairs myself. Grant saw it immediately. "What is that supposed to mean?" I placed the chair quietly at the far end of the dining table. "It means we're done pretending." The room went silent. Rachel sat near the kitchen doorway, twisting her wedding ring so hard I thought she might crack the skin beneath it. Abby stayed close to Theo on the couch. Russell Knox stood near the wall beside Faith Lowell. Neil Porter had a slim leather folder under one arm, and Helen Ward sat directly across from Grant, exactly where Carol would have wanted her. Grant laughed once under his breath. "This is ridiculous." Helen opened the trust binder calmly. "No," she said. "What happened at Thanksgiving was ridiculous." Grant's jaw tightened immediately. I noticed something then. For the first time since Thanksgiving, he looked uncertain, not guilty. Men like Grant rarely arrive at guilt before consequences, but uncertain. That mattered. Helen folded her hands. "Before we begin, I want everyone here to understand something clearly. This home is not under review because of financial hardship." She looked directly at Grant. "It is under review because financial pressure was used to justify humiliation, misrepresentation, and unauthorized refinance activity." Rachel closed her eyes. Grant leaned back in his chair. "You're making me sound like a criminal because I explored refinancing options." Neil Porter spoke for the first time. "You explored them under inaccurate ownership representation." Grant turned sharply. "That's not true." Neil calmly removed a paper from his folder. "You identified yourself and Rachel Pryor as primary household authorities while omitting trustee control. That's paperwork language." "No," Neil replied evenly. "That's title language." The room became very still. Grant looked toward Rachel instinctively. She looked down. That told me more than shouting ever could. Helen slid several printed pages across the table. Projected cash-out refinance amount, $418,000. Faith Lowell let out a quiet breath. Russell shook his head slowly. Theo looked confused. "Is that a lot?" Nobody answered immediately. Children always ask the cleanest question in the room. Grant finally spoke again. "We were trying to stabilize things financially." Helen nodded once. "Then explain the basement conversion projections." Grant's expression shifted. Only slightly, but enough. "You don't understand modern equity." I almost smiled hearing that line again, because weak arguments always return to familiar hiding places. Helen turned another page. Projected rental income from lower-level conversion. Family elder participation expected to reduce following holiday transition event. Grant sat forward immediately. "That wording came from the broker." "But the information came from someone," Helen replied calmly. Nobody spoke. Rain tapped softly against the dining room windows. Then Abby stood up quietly. Every adult looked at her. She held her phone tightly in both hands. "I recorded Thanksgiving," she said softly. Grant's face lost color immediately. "Abby," Rachel whispered. But Abby shook her head. "No." That single word sounded stronger than anything in the room so far. She pressed play. Grant's voice filled the dining room instantly. "Main table is for real family." Then laughter. Then Theo's small voice asking why Grandpa was downstairs. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed loudly. The house itself seemed embarrassed. Theo stared at the floor while the recording played. Rachel covered her mouth with both hands. And Grant kept trying to look annoyed instead of exposed. That is the strange thing about pride. Even cornered people often try to save image before truth. When the recording ended, silence settled heavily across the room. Helen spoke softly. "Mr. Pryor, would you like to explain how isolating the controlling trustee downstairs supported refinance discussions?" Grant stood abruptly. "Oh, come on. It was a Thanksgiving joke." "No," Russell said from the wall quietly. "It wasn't." Everyone turned toward him. Russell stepped forward slowly. There were 2 empty chairs upstairs all night. Grant glared at him. You don't know what you're talking about. Russell did not back down. I know you crossed out Jack's place card yourself. Rachel started crying again. Not dramatic crying, the exhausted kind. The kind that happens when denial finally collapses under accumulated truth. Faith Lowell spoke next. I saw the appraiser before Thanksgiving. Grant rubbed both hands over his face. This is insane. No, Faith replied calmly. Sending an old man to the basement while planning rental income around his silence is insane. That landed hard. I saw it in Rachel's face immediately, because for the first time, someone else finally said the thing she had been trying not to hear. Helen opened another section of the binder. The Badman Family Housing Trust names Jack Badman as controlling trustee. Grant stopped moving completely. Rachel slowly looked up. Helen continued. Rachel Pryor is protected resident beneficiary. Abby and Theo Pryor are future educational and housing beneficiaries. Then she looked directly at Grant. Grant Pryor has conditional occupancy rights only. The room changed after that sentence. You could feel it physically, like air pressure shifting before a storm. Grant stared at Helen. What does that mean? It means, Helen said calmly, you do not own this house. Theo blinked. Abby looked toward me slowly. Rachel looked like someone had removed the floor beneath her. And Grant? Grant laughed once, short, sharp, disbelieving. That's impossible. Neil Porter slid the deed copy across the table. Recorded under the trust 3 years ago. Grant grabbed the paper immediately. His eyes moved faster and faster across the page. Then slower. Then still. I watched something happen to him in real time. Not humility. Men like Grant do not arrive there quickly. Control leaving the room. That was different. He looked at Rachel. You knew? Rachel cried harder. I knew Dad and Mom protected the house. I didn't understand all of it. Grant stared at her like betrayal had only just become real because it happened to him personally. Then he turned toward me. You did this to control us. There it was. The final refuge. Control. I looked at him quietly for several seconds before answering. No, Grant. I reached into my coat pocket and placed Theo's drawing on the table beside the crossed-out place card. Grandpa ate downstairs. Basement. One of these was made by a child, I said softly. One by an adult. Both learned the same lesson from you. Grant looked away. Helen opened the final section of the binder. Due to unauthorized refinance activity, documented humiliation, misrepresentation of ownership authority, and coercive family pressure, the trust is exercising immediate review rights under the Dignity Occupancy Clause. Grant's head snapped up. What does that mean exactly? It means, Helen replied calmly, all refinance or collateral discussions are suspended indefinitely. Neil continued smoothly. Broker communication access is revoked. Helen added, any future financial action involving the property now requires direct trustee review. Grant looked at Rachel desperately now. Not lovingly, desperately, because desperation and affection are not the same thing. Then Helen removed one final page. Carol's handwriting. Family table addendum. She read it aloud slowly. No child should learn that love has assigned seating. Theo started crying quietly after that. Not loudly, just enough to break every adult in the room a little more. I looked at Rachel, really looked at her, and I saw my daughter clearly for the first time in months. Not evil, not greedy, weak, afraid, ashamed. She whispered through tears, Dad, I didn't think it would go this far. I nodded slowly. That's the problem with humiliation, sweetheart. Everyone looked at me. It always goes farther than the person laughing thinks it will. Grant pushed his chair back suddenly. So, what now? You throw me out? No, I said calmly. That surprised him. It surprised Rachel, too. I looked at the basement stairs one last time, then back at him. You're going to live every day knowing the house you used to measure people's worth never actually belonged to you. Nobody spoke after that. Outside, winter rain kept falling softly against the windows. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, Grant Pryor finally understood he had mistaken occupancy for ownership. 3 months later, winter finally began loosening its grip on Lancaster County. The snow melted slowly that year, dirty at the edges, heavy in the mornings, the kind of winter that does not leave all at once because some damage takes time to thaw. A lot changed after that meeting in the dining room. The refinance was permanently blocked. Bryce Keller disappeared quickly once lawyers started asking questions in writing instead of over the phone. Neil Porter told Helen Ward that several files connected to Bryce were suddenly under review. Funny how confident people become very quiet when signatures start mattering. Grant stayed in the house at first. Technically, he still could. Helen was right about that. The trust was never designed for revenge. Carol built it for protection. There is a difference. But something inside the house changed after the truth came out. Grant stopped walking around like the owner of the air itself. The loud confidence faded first, then the sarcasm, then the constant talk about equity opportunities. Turns out it is hard to play king in a castle once everybody learns your name was never on the deed. Rachel changed too. Not quickly. Healing never happens quickly when shame is involved. For weeks, she barely looked me in the eyes. Not because I screamed at her. I never did. Silence from a disappointed parent lasts longer than shouting. One Sunday afternoon, she came to my house alone. No Grant, no children. Just Rachel standing on my porch holding one of Carol's old casserole dishes she found in the back pantry. She looked tired, older somehow. Fear does that to people. "Dad," she whispered, "can I come in?" We sat at my kitchen table for almost 2 hours, mostly quiet at first. Then finally Rachel said the things she should have said months earlier. "I knew he crossed out your place card." I nodded once. "I know." Tears filled her eyes immediately. I kept telling myself it was easier not to fight him. That sentence mattered, because people watching from the outside often misunderstand betrayal. Sometimes betrayal is not cruelty. Sometimes it is cowardice that keeps choosing comfort over dignity, until one day the damage becomes real. Rachel looked around my kitchen slowly. "This place feels smaller than the house." "It is, but it feels safer." I thought about that after she left. A home does not become safe because of square footage. It becomes safe because nobody inside it has to earn their right to sit at the table. Grant moved out in March. Not dramatically. No police, no screaming. Just slow consequences. Trust restrictions remained in place. Refinance access stayed blocked. Occupancy review continued. And eventually, Rachel admitted she did not want Theo and Abby growing up believing humiliation was normal family behavior. That was the real ending. Not legal paperwork. Parenting. Grant rented an apartment 30 minutes away near a commercial strip lined with chain restaurants and payday loan offices. Last I heard, he was still trying to recover financially. Part of me pitied him. I mean that honestly. Because underneath all his arrogance was a terrified man trying to outrun the feeling that he had not built enough, earned enough, or become enough. But fear becomes dangerous when people start treating loved ones like stepping stones towards stability. Abby visits me every Thursday now. She brings homework and pretends not to enjoy my terrible grilled cheese sandwiches. Theo still asks if he can sit upstairs when he comes over. The first time he said that after everything happened, I almost broke down right there in the kitchen. So I pulled out every chair I owned and told him, "Buddy, every chair in this house belongs to family." He smiled, like that made perfect sense. Children recover faster when adults stop teaching them hierarchy disguised as love. Rachel started attending counseling in February. I paid for the first 6 sessions quietly through Helen so she would not refuse out of pride. Some wounds are expensive, but untreated wounds cost families even more. And the house stayed protected under the Badman Family Housing Trust. But Helen and I updated the documents. Carol's family table addendum became part of something larger now. The Family Dignity Housing Clause. No resident beneficiary could ever again use the home to isolate, shame, or manipulate another family member through status, access, or financial pressure. More importantly, we created something new from Carol's old teaching binders, the Carol Badman Home Skills Fund, small classes at the community center, budgeting, mortgage literacy, home repair basics, debt warning signs, understanding refinancing before signing anything. Mostly women attend, some divorced, some widowed, some exhausted from carrying entire households quietly for too many years. Sometimes I help teach the repair classes. Turns out old building inspectors still have a few useful things left in them. Funny thing is, I do not really think this story was ever about ownership, not the legal kind. It was about dignity, about what happens when people start believing financial pressure gives them permission to rank human value. America feels full of that lately. Everybody drowning in bills. Everybody scared of falling behind. Everybody trying to look successful enough to survive another month. And somewhere inside all that fear, families sometimes forget the people who carried them before the panic arrived. I think about Carol a lot now, especially her line about houses. A home is where people learn whether they are safe. Theo and Abby are learning that again slowly. So is Rachel. Maybe even Grant someday. I do not hate him. That surprises some people. But hatred is heavy, and old men eventually learn to stop carrying things that poison the hands holding them. Still, I kept one thing from Thanksgiving. The folded place card, basement. I keep it inside the trust binder, now beside Theo's drawing. 2 papers, one written by shame, one written by innocence. Together they remind me how fast a family can drift downward when nobody speaks up, and how important it is that somebody finally does. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and for listening to a story that still hurts a little to tell. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. And if this story moved you even a little, don't forget to subscribe to Final Act Revenge. Another story is waiting for you on your screen now. And maybe YouTube already knows it will stay with you too.